Welcome to Media Metrics channel and our program Money for Business. I'm here with you, Oleg Ivanov, with the founder of Crypto Bazaar and Invest Bazaar platforms. And as you know, in our program, we're discussing various ideas and various projects that are being developed at the moment on the one hand, and of course the investment opportunities around that. Today we have a very, very special guest, Joey Petrovsky from Polkadot. Joey, hi. Thanks for joining
Hello.
us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's a very interesting time at the moment, right? With lots of crazy things happening in the traditional space, in the financial space, and at the same time, we were quite used to such turbulence in the blockchain space. But it looks like the blockchain area is very, very quiet right now. Do you see the same things?
Well, we saw like quite a hit to the blockchain, I guess, investment markets, in line with the other traditional markets.
Sure.
But yes, as far as like development goes, blockchain is a little bit quiet right now. But I guess it's also just maybe the same as normal, but being shouted over by some other news.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's probably good, at least, for the last couple of years, with the teams being quite, focused on development, and of course, there's more and more teams that are trying to sort of develop as much as possible. So, just about Polkadot, right? I mean, you guys have a very, very long story. Starting back in 2018 with quite an unfortunate event with Parity wallets, and some funds that were raised and then eventually frozen there. Then 2019 was very, very wild in terms of like lots of people invested. There was a huge and very hot secondary market for people trading your contracts and reselling your allocations and things like that. Now 2020, I think everybody's expecting some releases. How you guys are feeling? Like what's happening with you at the moment?
Yeah, we're looking to launch in the next like maybe 2 months or so. Yeah, obviously, like we can't really condone OTC trading or whatever
Sure,
people are doing on the side.
sure.
But yeah, we're just like we don't even really talk about it that much here at Parity. We're pretty heads down, just working on building Polkadot and getting the final features ready for launch.
Right, right. So just going down a little bit, to the technology itself, and maybe for those who would like to um, picture the whole industry and understand your place in there. So can you can you try to attempt and describe like where you guys are placed? I mean, there's so many things that are right now happening in the space, right? So many projects that are trying to tackle the issues of scalability, interoperability, without the compromises of shifting to this centralized systems and so on and so forth, multi-chains, DAGs, Lightning networks, cross chains, whatever you name it, right? What are you guys? What is your place? Where's Polkadot in this mess?
Yeah, so Polkadot kind of came out of this interoperability angle, but I think it kind of solves a couple other problems together with it. And so, we look at interoperability, scalability, and security all as kind of like one thing. They're just kind of like three different angles to look at
Hmm.
the same general principle. And so we started with this idea of scalability, but says, you're not going to have a single blockchain that's going to handle everything because one application can really like influence the other application. So like we saw this with CryptoKitties on Ethereum that the traffic in this one application had a big influence on other applications that have nothing to do with CryptoKitties. And so we came from this idea of scalability of just like putting applications in their own blockchain where they can act independently. And then you kind of have to have the interoperability because like one of the nice things on a single chain is that the different accounts, or in Ethereum, like an account can actually be, a contract with some logic behind it. Different accounts and applications can interact with each other. And so we had to compensate for that. And so Polkadot really tries to solve this messaging problem of how do we put applications in independent chains so that they are independent, they're sovereign, they have their own governance, they're not influenced by transaction volume on some other chain, but still preserve that feature where they can talk to each other. And then that's where like the security part comes in, is that when different applications send messages to each other, they have to be able to trust those messages, or
Right.
like trust is kind of a funny word, but like we want them to be trust free. They shouldn't really have to trust the message, or they should be able to trust the message without trusting the sender. And so that's where like, I think it might be like a little bit early to start talking really technical, but Polkadot's a sharded solution, and so all of these different applications are still sharing state. And so Polkadot really provides the context for these different messages to be able to be interpreted without trusting the sender, because you trust Polkadot, the entire system.
Right, right. Okay. So if we go maybe one step deeper, how does this look? I mean, for the end user, I guess it's pretty much the same, right? So you use the application, you don't know what's happening under the hood. In terms of the developer scope, so what do you have to have as a set of skills to actually, run on Polkadot and do you have to build from scratch pretty much, or you pretty much integrate what's already is there, on EOS, on Ethereum, on you name it, right?
Yeah, well, so I'll kind of start with the user side and then go into the developers.
Sure.
From a user, what you'll see is a bunch of different parachains. And so like we call these different chains within the Polkadot system parachains. And then there's also this idea of a parathread, but that might be getting a little bit into the weeds here. And like this is just one of the cool things about Polkadot, and it'll kind of like feed into the developer side of this question. From a user perspective, you'll see a bunch of different chains. And so these chains can all have custom logic. So you can have one chain that's like focused on smart contracts, and you can have another chain that's focused on governance tools, and another chain that's a stable coin, and another chain that's like an application, some game or something, or like a DeFi protocol. And from the user perspective, you'll see all these different chains. They all have different APIs and different logic in them. From the actual user or from the developer perspective, though, it's kind of the other way. So if you're looking at the parachains from inside of Polkadot, like say you're a validator, and you're kind of looking chain to chain, they're all actually going to look the same. And so this is where like the actual development comes in, is that we've made this abstraction where everything compiles down to WebAssembly. And so a parachain is really just like some abstract logic that compiles down to this execute block function. And so from the inside of Polkadot, you're just seeing all these chains that say, here's an execute block function, and there's some abstract logic behind this. Of course, to the users, this abstract logic is different. It's unique for every chain. And so that actually like really pushed us to develop this toolkit called Substrate. And what Substrate is like, instead of having to remake blockchain clients where most of it is like redundant work, like if you look at like a Bitcoin client versus Ethereum client, versus a Zcash client versus a Polkadot client, they're all going to have like networking, telemetry, a database, RPCs.
Right.
And so, but the thing that makes these chains different is actually the logic. In Bitcoin, like the logic says, here's a UTXO set, and then here's like a valid operation on these UTXOs, which, mostly comes down to like reassign this UTXO to a different key. And Ethereum, has a much different, like there's a whole set of opcodes on the EVM, which are like the rules for how to change state, which is like this is the kind of information that you can put in a block. And so that's what really makes these blockchains unique, but actually like all this like underlying stuff in the client is the same. And so we develop Substrate. So it's kind of like a parachain developer kit where all of this like lower level stuff is taken care of for you, and you just design like what's the interface I want my chain to have, what's the logic, what kind of information do I want to store in this chain, and then what kind of operations on this information do I want to allow. And so from a developer perspective, most of this like lower level stuff is taken care of for you, and then we provide all the tools. If you want to store some information, we have like all these tools to put that information into the right format for the database that comes with the Substrate client. Of course, like you can develop parachains without Substrate because you just have to kind of target this WebAssembly interface that Polkadot provides. But that's really like how parachain development comes down for the developer, is being able to like really just focus on this logic of what do I want my chain to do? What do I want the application to look like?
Okay. Who do you regard as your, I don't know, competitors, or pretty much, the ones that probably doing something close to you? What you guys are trying to do?
Yeah.
Would it be Cosmos or something, or maybe some other guys?
Like so Cosmos isn't a sharded solution. I would say like our main competitors are the other people building sharded blockchains.
Yeah.
So like Ethereum 2 is a sharded system. So like the difference between Polkadot and Ethereum 2 is that all the shards in Ethereum 2, they all have the same state transition function. So they're all providing this EWASM interface to put smart contracts on. And
Right.
so in that system, like from a user perspective, each shard is the same, and you deploy your Solidity or some other language smart contract on that shard. Whereas in Polkadot, each shard is different from a user perspective. You're not really operating on a smart contract level. You're actually writing the interface to the chain itself. So yeah, like to answer like the Cosmos question, like that's like a bridge hub solution where all these chains are independent and they can send messages to each other, but they still have to actually like trust the provenance of that message
Right.
uh, because they're not sharing any kind of state or validation logic.
I see. So basically, you have like less layers than the ones that you just mentioned, right? I mean, the solutions that you just mentioned.
What do you mean by layers?
I mean, like less intermediaries, maybe, in terms of intermediary maybe section as in the case with smart contracts in Ethereum or Cosmos as a platform itself. And with you just have pretty much a direct interaction with the chain itself, right?
Yeah, so like in the Cosmos SDK, you do actually have control over the chain itself, but we provide like, in this, I would actually say like we have an extra layer of abstraction here, which is the runtime, and then in Substrates, like you can take a bunch of the modules and you can compose them together. So Substrate, like it gives you a bunch of modules that you can compose, but you can also add your custom modules and interact with the logic that's in these modules in your own way. Whereas in like the Cosmos SDK, you're just kind of like pulling in these modules, but doesn't really give you like a lot of freedom to interact with them or compose them. So yeah, when it comes to like the blockchain development, yes, we're at a lower level than Ethereum where you're not like interacting with a smart contract, you're actually interacting with the chain itself. But we do provide some extra abstraction layers than something like the Cosmos SDK.
Sure. Okay, got it. Now, many actually use you as, many developers in the space and maybe many projects are actually, well, focused on you, right, and use you in a way as a benchmark for this reason or another. I mean, a well-known example is Telegram Open Network, right, which used a lot of ideas in their white paper as their infrastructure from you, right, from Polkadot. Also, lots of developers are really anticipating your releases and so on and so forth. So, why do you think? I mean, you guys made such a prominent place. Actually, got such a prominent place in the space. In your opinion?
So right. I mean, I've been at Parity for like almost a year and a half, and so
Right.
that reputation predates my spot here a little bit. But I think a lot of it is just like what we've delivered in the past. We delivered like the first C++ Ethereum client, and then Zcash client, a Bitcoin client, and then we started working on Polkadot. And we've done a lot of this through a bear market. Of course, like in 2017, there was a lot of money going around and everybody could kind of be super active. But in 2018, 2019, when things were quieter and maybe not looking so good, or like a lot of teams had to close shop, we just kept pushing out high quality code and developing on Ethereum and Polkadot. So I think that that kind of goes across industry. It's not just blockchain. We see like a lot of strong projects coming out. Anytime there's tough times, it's who can like keep shipping code or product even when the economy doesn't look so great.
Yeah, that makes sense. Makes a lot of sense. And thanks for being so humble while speaking about this. Listen, just going back to the market itself and the typical limitations of any protocol or any solution that is coming out in the market. There's always this catch-22 story, right? That on the one hand you need users to make sure that the protocol is being used. On the other hand, you need developers who would actually ship products on top of this protocol. And there has been so many attempts to actually try to come close and compete with Ethereum, but even EOS is struggling, and all the other teams are struggling. So, how do you think? I mean, do you guys have a plan of how you're going to attract the user base to and the developer base to your solution, and once you start shipping?
Yeah, I mean, like to get users, you have to have applications, of course. And so like, our main strategy, like a lot of other blockchain companies, is like getting developers to actually build those applications. And so, Parity has a builders program where we provide a lot of support to builders. And the Web3 Foundation has a grants program to give grants to people who are building on Polkadot. I would say, like, yeah, there have been a lot of attempts at Ethereum, but I would say this market is still so young and immature that I wouldn't give anybody the benefit of the doubt of just being like the established player. And even if we look at like these big kind of, we would call catastrophes, like the DAO or like the Parity wallets,
Yeah.
we're talking like hundreds of millions of dollars that were lost. But like my background is in the satellite industry, and you lose like a $5 billion satellite or something. And so,
Yeah, that's a big difference, right?
we kind of panic about like losing $100 million to a smart contract. And it is like a lot of money to like a very nascent industry. But
Sure.
at the end of the day, like when we're talking about more mature industries and like who's an actual established player, like this is not a lot of money. So,
Right.
this is kind of like the baby steps into being something more mature. And, I think there's still a lot of progress to go before we say that somebody has like a foothold as being, the default solution.
Totally agree. Now, if we go into the again industry itself, and I mean, if you look into the history, right, it looks like we went past the boom of of the idea that okay, blockchain is about cross-border transactions. Then we went through the wave of crypto crowdfunding, right, through ICOs and IOs, which is now probably down to ground zero. Then we were all expecting the STOs to pick up, but again, the traditional brick and mortar business is not really moving that space because of the legislative regulations and that are being developed as well. Then last year, a lot of people were betting on DeFi and DAOs, and right now it looks like there is a lot of movement in there. But again, this segment is so tiny that it's just like really minuscule, right? I mean, we're talking about just a few $100 million and stuff. So it doesn't look like anything is really picking up on the mass scale here. I mean, are you guys? I wouldn't want to use the word betting, but I mean, do you still like focus on something? Do you bet that something that some of the trends that you probably see in the space at the moment are the ones that you guys are watching very closely and maybe stimulate?
Yeah, so I think like the big the big surprises, like the big things that catch on, are usually they come out of nowhere.
Yeah.
They're completely unexpected uses of technology, and so what we do here is we really don't focus on applications so much or like certain verticals. We just focus on abstraction, and so how can we make this logic and these interfaces as abstract as possible so that you could really put anything on top of them. Yeah, like we have some teams building DeFi protocols and like second layer stuff, and that's all interesting. But I think like, you know, I heard this example a month or two ago that like text messaging was developed by some people who were deaf and they wanted to communicate using phones, and they started using this protocol for something that was completely different than what it was intended. And so I I don't think we try to design something for a specific application or try to bet on like one application being the thing that will make blockchain successful. I think we just try to make blockchain development as flexible and generic as possible so that somebody who's, more creative and not necessarily just like stuck in this thought process of computer science or finance, with like a lot of people in blockchain kind of come from finance, that somebody else can come along and do something interesting with this.
Sure, makes sense. Um, what do you see as the major limitations right now in the space?
That's a good question. Definitely like regulatory uncertainty,
Sure.
that people just it's kind of scary to start a business in the space, and then you have this question of like, well, where do I start a business, and where can I even have customers? That's even a bigger thing.
That's
People
true.
kind of figure out where they can establish their business, and then you find out you can't have customers from the U.S. or something.
Hmm.
So that's definitely something. Other limitations, yeah, I would say like centralization of infrastructure. Like we still see people running validators, on AWS and Azure, and so yeah, getting like more diverse infrastructure setups, and you kind of wonder like how could some of these networks be shut down, whether it's by like ISPs or by cloud providers. Um, yeah, there's always more to decentralize.
Yeah, yeah. And one thing I wanted to ask you about DAOs. I mean, it's the whole idea behind it, of course, is very similar to the whole concept of decentralization, which in general is about blockchain, right? So there's always this problem of being permissioned or permissionless, right? When you talk about the governance model and so on and so forth, especially when we're talking about development of the infrastructure, that as time goes on, you would need improvements, right? And every time there is new developments and new improvements in your traditional blockchain protocols, there is always this problem of validators or miners to actually agree on the next improvement or disagree, right? And that's why you end up with forks and a whole bunch of other problems. Or I mean, look at Ethereum, right? When the solutions are pretty much not rolled out just because of the economic bias of the miners. Now, do you think that the solutions that are coming out right now, would they need some automated ways of of updates, let's call them this way, for the like user perspective, right? When you just understand that on a weekly basis you have some updates, you click a button and it's just rolled out, or you do need some governance models where certain selected people would actually need to vote whether they would apply this application or not. I mean this update or not.
Yeah, so that's super important, and that's something we provide with Substrate is upgradability, which was like a big push that we had early on, and so this actually it goes nicely with our use of WASM, like WebAssembly, in the Polkadot runtime environment itself, and this was like a big design decision that it not only lets us have these like heterogeneous chains where like each chain is different from the outside, but from the inside it just says like here's an execute block function with some abstract logic behind it. It also lets us upgrade these chains independently, and so um, like what we do is we actually store. This is like kind of meta because you have like this runtime, like the state transition function, but it actually stores itself within itself, and so um, all of our governance has like autonomous enactment. So we do provide like a bunch of different governance tools, like a council, a technical committee, and then like general like public voting systems. And but yes, like so most DAOs, most contracts, or most other blockchains are limited by this fact that like yes, you can have on-chain governance that votes to enact like some protocol change or some upgrade to the DAO. But then you have to have the miners actually like run the software, and
Right.
so it's still like validators or miners who ultimately control the system. And in Polkadot, it's actually not that way. So when something gets passed via our governance processes, it gets autonomously enacted. So it will take like this new update and apply itself to itself, and then since our client is actually like not running the native code, but actually running the WebAssembly, uh, the abstract logic that's stored within itself, it can actually just put in its new logic and run this without relying on validators to update. So even if validators do not update their software, they're still actually going to run whatever decision was enacted via
Hmm.
the chain's governance.
I'll say, but then there's always this question of who are the ones who are making those decisions, right? How do you pick them, or how do you select them?
Yeah. So in Polkadot, and of course, like in your own parachain, like you can design it to be however you want, really.
Sure.
but I'll just talk about like the Polkadot relay chain for now. So the way we select them is it's really everybody. Everybody can vote. We do have some like alternative methods to get something to a vote. One of which is a council, and so people kind of vote on these council members. I think it's going to be like up to 24, but the number can change.
Sure.
And so this council kind of represents passive stakeholders, where like if they agree on something unanimously, there's actually like a lower passage threshold for a referendum to pass. And then but also the public can propose things. So like anybody, not just the council, can propose some change to the system, and it can go through a vote. And the way we do it is like, I would say like two things. Like one is like this vote threshold can kind of change. We use something called adaptive quorum biasing, which is related to the square root of the turnout versus the square root of the total electorate. And so as the turnout approaches 100%, it converges to be like a simple majority. But if you have like only 30% turnout, then maybe it only takes 35% of the vote to actually pass something that the council had passed unanimously. But if 100% of people turn out, then it's a simple majority. So always like 50% of token holders can kind of control which way something goes. And the other thing we do is like conviction locking. And so when you vote, you can actually like lock up your tokens for some period. And so we do it in terms of enactment periods. So like if you're willing to lock up your tokens for 4x the enactment period, then you actually get like double the vote power. So enactment period is like 1 month, which basically says like, some proposal passes. It's going to wait 1 month until it actually gets enacted, which gives people who disagreed with the proposal, who voted against it, they can just decide like, hey, I want to rage quit. I'm done.
Sure.
But the people who actually voted for passing this, they're actually locked in. So like once this gets enacted, their tokens are locked for another month. And so they have to kind of like stick with it and hold like, be willing to hold tokens in accordance with their decision. And
Sure.
so
Sure. No, that makes sense. Yeah.
actually, like,
Yeah.
you can actually lock these longer and say like, I'm willing to lock for 4 months and I'll have my vote count twice as much, as opposed to locking for 1 month. And so this kind of gives smaller token holders, if they are like very strongly convinced of something, a little bit more voice than like just having a whale control something.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, that makes sense. So, do I understand you correctly that you have a bit of a like dynamic voting system, depending on what exactly is happening? Because I don't know if you study the cases of Aragon right now, which is pretty much one of the standards right now for setting up DAOs for this or that solution. One of the issues is that not the issues, but the ones who are actually launching DAOs, right? Is actually the fact that when you raise a question for voting, right? It actually in most cases you actually have to stimulate people to come and vote, and time goes by and just people are not really focused in most cases. So in this case, do you have some automatic solutions that in a timely manner, if people don't vote, then you have an automatic decision? But then again, who decides that this automatic decisions should be implemented?
Yeah, so I mean, like the default position for any proposal is to not pass it.
Right.
But this is where like really where the council comes in to represent these people who don't turn up to vote. Where like if the council passes something unanimously, and of course like people have to vote for this council, so you could turn up once and like vote for the council members that you want, and then never vote again. So if the council passes something unanimously, then it can go to a vote based on this like dynamic threshold, where it says like if only 20% of the electorate turns up for this vote, then it's going to pass with only like 30% voting in favor of it.
Okay, I see.
Right, and so like that's like the council is there to represent these people who don't show up to vote.
But then what happens if half of the council doesn't show up? if there's cases like that.
Right. I mean, hopefully they get voted out.
Yeah, that makes sense, because that's if they represent the public, then they should act accordingly, right?
Right.
I see. Great. So So you're saying that you're going to be released pretty much like in a couple of weeks' time, right?
Hopefully, yeah, we're just finishing up some audits here, but we're getting quite close to all the features that we need, and we've had this network Kusama since August, so it's actually getting quite old now. It's like 6 or 7 months old, but we've done a lot of testing on Kusama to work out some of our client issues and just find some other bugs, and so we're just pushing like the final features that we want to have in Polkadot into Kusama to make sure that everything goes smoothly. Finishing up a little bit of auditing and testing on the code, some benchmarking so that we can have a really robust fee system. And then, yeah, then we're pretty much clear for launch after that.
Sweet. Okay. So what's the plan? I mean, you guys are planning to deploy, as many applications as possible through Web3 and Parity communities, or any events that you're planning, or hackathons, or anything else?
Yeah, so I know the Web3 Foundation is planning a couple hackathons right now. And then like it's going to be a staged rollout of getting, enabling all the core features and then opening up the parachains, probably be like late summer or fall. And I would expect to see like the first wave of parachains to be kind of like other infrastructure parachains. So Polkadot itself is kind of like infrastructure for infrastructure. We
Sure.
don't really expect to see like applications directly on Polkadot.
Right.
It's really what it's meant for. And so I would expect like the first wave of parachains to be things like stablecoin, decentralized exchange, governance tools, smart contract platform, maybe like a bridge to Ethereum or Bitcoin, so that we can represent those assets within Polkadot. And then, of course, like none of these are really applications in and of themselves, right? That's just like these are tools that other chains can come in, and it's
Right.
like they have a stablecoin, they have a DEX, they have a smart contract platform. So I would expect that to be like the first wave of parachains that come into Polkadot.
Right. Okay. I see. Um, so that's you're talking, end of summer, beginning of the fall. So probably, yeah, probably the timing would be good after, Bitcoin halving and and hopefully the market would look a little bit better than now.
Yeah, we hope, right?
Huh? Totally. Listen, yeah, it would be great, of course, if you already have some announcements in terms of like you were saying, the hackathons and so on and so forth. But I guess it's a little bit premature in terms of the dates. But other than that, if you could advise us where we could keep track of of your developments, maybe announcements, how to track you on the social media, this would be great.
Yeah, on Twitter we have like Web3 Foundation. It's just at Web3 Foundation, and Parity is at Parity Technologies. I think there's also an at Polkadot Network.
Hmm.
I'm sure our social media manager will not be happy that I forgot that off the top of my head. But it's all there. And then like we have Polkadot.network. The blog is really helpful. There's a lot of good articles on there. And then our Polkadot wiki. We've been putting a lot of work into that lately. And so you can look into the Polkadot wiki if you want some more detailed technical information. And if you're a developer looking to get started developing one of the parachains and you want to use Substrate, we have a developer hub. That's substrate.dev.
Sure. Okay. Well, thanks very much for this. I guess the time is coming up pretty much. It's being very, very insightful, and hope you guys have a smoother road than it was before. Now that you're coming to the release, and all the good luck with it.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks very much, Joe. Have a good time. Bye.
Yep.